Chesapeake Bay Blues. What's going on, everybody? Crazyhorse here. So glad to have you for the fifth episode. It's crazy. Time flies, man. The fifth episode of the Crazyhorse Fishing Saloon. Really excited to have Mr. Tommy Robinson here tonight of Amped Up Outdoors. And next week we have Alan Batista, author of Light Tackle Kayak Trolling the Chesapeake Bay and Light Tackle Jigging Kayak Jigging the Chesapeake Bay. In the mothership business, if you don't know what we're trying to plan here and trying to put together, or what we are putting together, is a service that will bring the entire bay to the paddler. So my center console will be bringing kayakers from anywhere on the eastern shore, on the western shore to the eastern shore islands, and a lot of places on the western shore that aren't easy to get to. And the exciting news on that this week is that the fleet is fully purchased. And we're going to have some videos once those kayaks and paddle boards get fully outfitted and geared up. So I'm going to provide some videos on that, and that should be really cool. But I'm super excited to have Tommy. Tommy, where'd you go, bro? Uh-oh. Hang on. Tommy is not here. Tommy, if you're watching, jump back on. So while he's coming, I'm going to go ahead and introduce Tommy. Tommy was born and raised. There he is. There he is.
There we go. There we go.
My man, he almost gave me a stroke. I almost had them Chesapeake Bay Blues.
That comes.
Man, Tommy, you're killing me, bro. Anyways, right when I was getting ready to introduce you, Tommy was born and raised in Southwest Baltimore in an area known as the Lumberyard. He began fishing at a very young age and still very much a strong passion of his. Something we're going to talk about tonight is what, Tommy discovered carp in the neighborhood creek that runs through the city. It's called the Gwynn Falls, a.k.a. Stinky River. I've never been to the Stinky River, but I'll take your word for it. Tommy's also a big music lover, and especially heavy music. And he combined that love for heavy music. Am I doing it right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. He combined that love for heavy music and fishing and formed Amped Up Fishing, which is now Amped Up Outdoors. Check out Amped Up Outdoors on YouTube and Facebook. Amped Up Outdoors is a really cool YouTube channel. If you haven't checked it out, again, like I did last week, I'm not going to be offended if you guys take a second to go follow them. It's a great channel, lots of good content, and they host annual snakehead tournaments, which are really cool. How you doing, Tommy?
Doing well. I'm past my bedtime, so this better be entertaining, or I'm going to be falling asleep over here.
Well, hey, bro, you're the entertainment, man. So
let's hope other people don't fall asleep with me, huh?
Yeah, you're the guest, so people. I probably already put people to sleep, but yeah, I mean, you and I were talking before the show started, and I was like, man, as soon as this is over, every time I go right upstairs and I go to bed, way past my bedtime. But yeah, we just talked about the snakehead tournaments. Tell us a little bit more about that. Are you guys going to do one this year?
As of right now, we have a couple set up. Due to COVID, things are kind of up in the air. But we do have our two main that we normally do, one in the spring, which is our team tournament, and then we do another one in the fall, which is our Big Liz tournament, which is your biggest bass plus your biggest snakehead. So as of right now, both of those are set up in our events page on Facebook, and soon we'll be on our website at ampedupfishing.com.
Sweet. Well, we decided to do something a little different tonight because, like last week we had people talking about snakehead, and next week people, Alan will be talking about striped bass. But I wanted to do something different because I always thought that, what your favorite fish to target was really unique. Might not have been my thing, but like I couldn't take it away from you for being really unique. But you've been fishing your whole life. What is it about fishing for carp that got you passionate about targeting them?
It actually started at a pretty young age. My uncle, my aunt and uncle raised me again in Baltimore, and my uncle didn't get a whole lot of time off from work. And when he did, he would trek up to Loch Raven Reservoir and fish below the dam. And my older cousins would go up there with me, and they would take bread for sandwiches and stuff, and whatever leftover bread they had, they would throw down below the dam. And these giant carp. I mean, they looked like they were 5, 6 foot long. Obviously, they were that big, but to a little kid up above that dam, they looked massive. And my cousins used to tease me like they were going to grab me and feed me to the carp, and so it was that's where the obsession kind of started. And then as I got older and discovered them in the creek, Stinky River as we called it growing up, and seeing these fish, and I'm like, wow, they're in here, and they would come up in there to spawn. There's resident fish that live in the creek that are like 4 or 5 pound, not real big, but these 15 to 25 pounders would come up in the creek, and it's a pretty good sight when you don't normally see fish that big in shallow water like that. So
Sure.
went to the library to try to learn a lot about them, back then before the internet, because I'm kind of old, and I just learned as much as possible. The only thing about learning is, you can only learn so much by reading. You got to have a lot of hands-on. So there was a lot of trials and errors in those early years. I mean, talking, early 80s as a kid.
Sure. And I want to remind everyone, as we've done the last several weeks, Tommy is going to choose the best question of the night. And I'll go ahead and throw it up there now. Because I think the prize that Tommy picked out tonight is particularly cool. So let me go ahead and show what that is. And so Tommy's going to choose the best question of the night. And here is the prize pack. And I'll let Tommy walk us through what's in there.
All right. So basically, there's a pack of floats in there, Waggler floats. It's designed for carp fishing, various sizes. These are from Big Carp Tackle. My friend Dave Moore down there in Oklahoma. You can buy all your carp gear from him. He's got pretty much anything you need to target carp, be it for European methods that I like to use, or just plain simple American, a bobber or a sinker and your bread ball. It doesn't have to be complicated, but we definitely make it like that. So the other things are in there. There's some busting baits, about a dozen of them that I kind of, took some Sharpies and some dyes and stuff like that. Hopefully you can see that okay. And I got various sizes and different colors, and just something different for the fish to see. They've never seen anything like these, I can promise you that. So they're definitely thing in it. And of course, who doesn't like stickers? A bunch of slaps of various sizes. Got some coasters here, amped up coasters, men and ladies. Ladies love the fish too. So we got quite a few that follow us, our amped up nation. So
yeah, I'm excited about the prize pack tonight. So you already kind of talked about it a little bit, and it's funny. I live like right on an inlet of the Chesapeake Bay, so it's pretty salty. We're like 25 miles south of the Bay Bridge, so it starts to get pretty salty down there. And you'll see carp coming in that inlet, once every couple of years. And I don't know. I always thought it was too salty for them, but when I first saw them, I would try to catch them with lures, and that never did the trick. They're not like your standard, snakehead or striped bass or anything like that, where they're going to attack a lure, right?
Well, you're right in some ways. I mean, I have caught plenty of them on lures by accident most of the time, just like most people have. They seem to do that a lot more in the spring, early spring, late winter, like say March and April. You could be crappie fishing, fishing for bluegills, and they love little bugs and stuff. So if you're using little panfish jigs, they will definitely take those. They're a little bit more energetic in the spring when that ice is melting and they're trying to feed up really fast, just like they do in the fall. And you'll be surprised that I've caught them on crankbaits, on lipless cranks. I've caught them on worm, plastic baits, you name it. I've caught them on it, but they do not, you're not going to go out there and target them on lures for the most part, but it does happen from time to time.
Now, what we're at minute 10, and I'm already going off script. But when the
Good.
carp are cruising through the shallows and it's like their mouth is just over the surface of the water. You know what I'm talking about?
Oh yeah, gulping for air, kind of like snakehead almost do. Um,
But they seem to just like go on and on and on with their mouth out of water. Is that
right.
what they're doing, gulping for air?
Yeah, just gulping some air, trying to get some fresh air, I guess. I mean, we're humans. We kind of don't really know why fish do what they do, but it's kind of what a lot of people would think. Especially you see them roll a lot too, rolling. Do that porpoise kind of rolling. Nobody knows why they do it, but most of the times when you're seeing them, a lot of activity, that's when they're not biting real well. When they're down, feeding and creating the mud clouds and all that stuff, that's when you really do a lot better when catching them.
All right, we got our first question coming in from. I'm going to lovingly call our friend Butch Smartass Huber, but he says,
Love you, Butch.
He says, Tommy, who's the best looking outlaw in your opinion?
Well, I guess it would be Jesse because we've never seen him. He's always got his face covered.
So you're like, no face is better than the rest of those guys, right?
I'm not going there. I'm not judging dudes, by the way.
You're like, you said that, Grant, not me. Another question from Dominic Becker. He says, when carp are in lily pads and seem to be rolling around, what are they doing, and can they be caught?
Again, like we just mentioned, when you see them, you can catch them. It's getting them to feed if they're not feeding. So chumming is just like you would for rockfish during chumming season. If you get them on the chum, you'll get them. Whether it's corn or bread, or whatever else you're chumming up with. If you get them feeding on it, then obviously, but they're scaredy cats. That's the big thing about them. If they're in shallow water and you're starting to, throw a whole bunch of heavy stuff out there, they're going to scatter and they're going to be gone. But they may come back and feed on it. So.
That's a good lead in for the next question, which is I've seen your bait making process and it's kind of involved. Can you walk us through how you make your carp bait?
Well, there's various, like I said, there's chum, or what a lot of people call pack bait, or method mix, and that basically that's something that's it's going to break down and attract the fish to your hook bait. So it's anything from grits to any type of grain, oatmeal, oats, you name it, chicken crumble. You mix all that stuff in with a wettener, so you have dry ingredients and you have binders such as like cream corn, and that stuff will break it in, and you just kind of mold it up around your sinker, and you throw it out there with your hook bait in there. Normally we use hair rigs, which is basically a thread extending past the hook, and you use a needle to thread it on. It's kind of, you have to look that up on the internet. I don't have any hair jigs in front of me, but the hair rig is actually not hair jigs, hair rigs. But the hair rig is definitely one of those items that you want in your arsenal when you're float fishing. You want float fit, good floats like these that are up for question of the night. So that's a good question. But yeah, you definitely can catch them, all times of year. But that method stuff in the bait making process definitely helps. You will definitely catch a lot more fish. And it's fun. You experiment with flavors, be it Jello or liquid flavors, strawberry, vanilla, anything sweet. And believe it or not, they also like fishy stuff like tuna and menhaden oil, just weird stuff. But the right combinations work for different times of year, just like rockfish. You don't use bloodworms and in certain parts of the year, and like this time of year, you would catch a 40-inch rockfish on a tiny little bloodworm. So, in the fall of the year, they want a 12-inch eel. So it's the same concept with using a bait making process for carp. It's basically, depending on the time of year you're using it.
And how do you keep it from staying on the hook? Because when I heard you describe the ingredients, it sounds like it hits water and it just kind of dissolves. What do you do to keep it together?
Well, they're called feeders, bait feeders, and what they are, it's like it goes around your lead, or it's the lead itself, and it has like little ridges in it. So it's not really meant to hold your bait per se, but just hold your chum. Your bait will stay on the hook regardless of what you're doing. You're just kind of like threading that on the top and just chucking it out. And as it sits, it just slowly breaks down and it's on the bottom, and the fish are in there feeding, and then they find your hook bait, and then boom, it's lights out. So it's a lot of fun. It could be as easy as you want it. You can buy pre-baited stuff, pre-mixed stuff, and just add corn to it. Like I said, my man Dave down there at Big Carp Tackle sells some. There's some other guys out there too that sell that stuff. So,
well, tell us about that. Let's say you wanted to make the simplest. You just wanted to give this carp fishing a try. You wanted to make and do it yourself. What's the simplest way to do it?
Well, at the local grocery store, you go buy those big canisters of old-fashioned oats, Quaker oats, and you get that and a can of cream corn, a bucket, dump it, mix it. If it's too wet, add a little bit more oats. If it's too dry, add a little bit more cream corn. And you just mix that all up, make into a ball. You don't want it real heavy because it does hold a lot of weight, and you have to have the proper rod to throw it, because that's why you can't really use a 6-foot ugly stick with this sort of European technique with this type of bait, because you'll snap that rod trying to throw it. So,
hey, it's crazy. Our discussion is leading perfectly into these questions, which is kind of cool. I was curious to see what the interest on carp was, and it seems like there is some. So Butch asked, he has to qualify his questions now that he's smart ass Butch. As a serious question, he has to say that I'm not messing around. But he says, "What's your go-to setup for carp from rig to bait? For those of us who haven't spent much time targeting these fish." Good question, Butch.
Yeah, it is a good question, and it all depends on where I'm fishing and what I'm fishing for. If I'm fishing for big fish, and to me that's my big thing. That's why I like to fish for carp, because I like to catch big fish to pull hard. If I'm fishing for, say, trophy fish, 25 pounds on up, and all my fish are catch and release, I don't keep carp at all. They're really not good to eat, and at least not to me. I've never even tried it, but I just heard I wouldn't like it. So, but anyway, if I'm fishing for big fish, I'm going to go on a baiting campaign and fish. Obviously, you have to fish waters that have big fish, big carp, because not all waters are equal. So, say you're going to fish a river system in the Chesapeake, such as Patapsco, like I fish. The spring and the fall, that's 2 times a year to catch them, big fish. Either you catch them in the spring during a migratory spawn run, or you're catching them in the fall when they're fattening up. And that's a good time to target them for, big fish. I'm going to use, it doesn't really matter the quality of the bait. And I know a lot of these carp experts that, catch a ton of them. I know my buddy Scott Osmond catches more big fish than anybody I know, and he uses plain, simple bread. Just bread, right out of a loaf, chucks out bread balls this big, chucks them out, stalks fish, catches giants all the time. So, but for me, I like to use either particles or boilies. Particles are like corn, feed corn, like maize that you buy from your hunting supply store of Bass Pro. Go buy a 50-pound bag of it, soak it overnight. I do a pressure cooker and basically cook that corn into like a 4 or 5 gallon bucket. Take a scoop that I have. I don't know if you've watched any of my videos in the past, but there's a bait scoop. Just chuck it out there where you're going to be fishing for a week. Get them feeding on it really good every day. Go down around the same time. Chuck it out there. Boilies for me, which are hard dough balls, they're different sizes, but they're mostly about the size of a grape that you would use. Carp don't have really big mouths, so anything really, really big, they just can't suck it down. And boilies are a hard dough ball. You can make them yourself. You can find recipes online to do it. I find it, it's easier to just basically go online and buy, a couple kilos, because everything's European for carp. It's a carp sport, but it's the biggest carp are the biggest sport fish in the world besides here in the United States. It's the craziest thing. You go over there.
It's like the soccer of fishing, right? Like
yeah, absolutely. Here's football. Everything else is football. Over there is soccer. So it's it's odd, but that's how it's true. And it's a shame, really, because people are missing out on a great fish that fight. They're everywhere. So
in France,
thing. If I were to fish for a bait, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but if I were to put a bait on how I was going to go about catching either a lot of fish or a bunch of fish, it would be simply chum, and fish with that bait right over top of it.
Cool. Another question coming from David Comfair. You ever fish for grass carp? Do you use same kind of bait?
I've caught just one grass carp, and Belgrove Pond. I don't know how the heck it got in there. It's on a Pethepsco. They are very similar to carp. They're not even a carp, believe it or not. But they are they're invasive fish, and they're all sterile as far as I know, the ones that are in near Maryland. They can't reproduce. But again, bread is probably the best bait you can use for grass carp, bread or corn, sweet corn.
Okay. I got another question here. I'm not sure if this one's a serious one or not, if this is a Butch question, but Mudcarp Miller asks, do you call it panko or ponko breadcrumbs?
Oh, see, now that's a funny story. And Mudcarp Miller is our boy, and he's an amped up, and he's a convert. You know, he's definitely found carp, and it's his, as you can see by his name, that's his name on Facebook, Mudcarp Miller. That's old Kenny, and it is panko, and that's a long going joke. For those of you watch a lot of YouTube, catfishing carp. I don't know if you guys know Luke, but you know he's the guy from Utah that lives down in Northern Virginia, and he calls it ponko, and so it's an ongoing joke for us.
I call it panko.
I've never heard anyone else call it ponko, but whatever.
So, your biggest carp ever? Can you walk us through the catch in as much detail as you possibly can? Like, we want the whole story. Try to think about the day of, the prep, you know, the take, the fight, the whole thing. You know, you don't have to tell us your spot, but maybe give us the region you were in.
Now I'll give you the whole rundown. It's pretty odd. Back in the early or the late 90s, you know, when I started going on the internet and discovering these forums, you know, before Facebook and all these other social media pages, obviously, I discovered this group called the Carp Anglers Group. And, you know, it's a bunch of guys that love carp fishing. And they had a group, and they have little events all over. So met a bunch of local guys in the area. Pat Kerwin, who's a good friend of mine down in DC, Virginia area, and Mark Metzger, who's another good friend of mine, lives down in Silver Spring. We had a little fish in, which is basically a social event. You go and you all fish together. That's the great thing about carp fishing, is you can actually fish each other, you know, with each other while your rods are sitting out there waiting and socialize, you know, drink a beer, have a barbecue, you know, just sit there and chill. And so the CAG, as we call it, Carp Anglers Group, had an event in Texas that they just started like 2 years prior. It was called the Austin Team Championship. It was in Austin, Texas, on what is now called Lady Bird Lake, but we all refer it to as Town Lake. And it's the Colorado River system. It runs through Austin, Texas, and it just holds some giant fish. And so first time ever traveling outside of this area. I've never been on a plane before. Mark Metzger goes, "Hey, do you want to fish it with me?" And I'm like, okay, but I have no clue what I'm doing. You know, I'm just getting into this Euro thing. And I'm like, he's like, "Oh, I got you, man." So he's one of those business guys. He's got a custom tailor shop. He sells custom clothes in Virginia. And he's got the gift of gab, and he made some sponsorships where he made this trip unbelievable. It was 100% sponsored, you know, paid for, airfare, food, you know, we got free bait, everything. So long story short, I arrived on my first flight to Texas, and how this works is you draw pegs of where you're going to fish. You can't just go pick a spot and fish. So it's kind of makes it somewhat fair to, you know, across the board. So some guy that lives down there in Texas knows all the honey holes. Some guy here in Maryland has no clue what he's doing. So you draw random pegs. The peg number dictates where you set up for the day, and it's a 2-day event. So the first day, Mark and I picked a great peg. It was a bridge peg, which is, you know, I forget what the bridge is. I think it's Congress Street, but I can't remember. It's been a long time. It's 2003, I believe. So almost 20 years ago. So it's been a while. But we got some boilies, which, you know, those dough balls I was telling you about. We got those. They came in and got confiscated because it was during Mad Cow, all that Mad Cow stuff that was going on. And Customs took all our bait that was sponsored.
What?
So we had no bait. Yeah, so we had all this bait coming over for free that we were going to use. And
so you're like in a bridge, and they pull up on you and like confiscate your bait?
No. Before it arrived, well, as it arrived in the United States,
Oh, okay, okay,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah, it didn't even, we didn't get it. So let's put it that way. So we had to buy bait at the last minute. So, these guys were selling boilies there, and they said they've been catching on pineapple boilies. So we're like, okay, well, let's get a bag of those and we'll try it. So we're chucking them out there. I had a very low end tackle. I had Cabela's Predator rods, which are now defunct. They're basically European carp rods, but they're 9 foot. No, they're 11 foot. I'm sorry, 11 foot, 2.25 pound test curve. Now your average carp rod's a little heavier than that, so another foot, and normally about 3 pound test curve is about the average. So a little bit lighter weight. I got just regular reels. These guys use big pit reels with lots of line, and because if you catch a big fish and you're chucked out there like 90 yards, and you hook a fish, a 35-pound fish, 40-pound fish can run 70 yards off your reel, and I am not exaggerating when I say this. So I made this cast with these Penn live liners, which were crap reels, by the way, and I got 12-pound mono on there. I whack it out there with one single boilie as far as I could possibly get it, bright yellow boilie, and we're catching fish throughout the day. And this one rod sat out there, and I'm just like, I'm just gonna leave it out there. And it took off, like a freight train. It was like smoking, where I almost thought I had to pour the water over the reel kind of deal. One of those deals like you're fishing for shark. And this thing is pulling off now. We got teams to our left and to our right, and everybody's got their lines out. So I get this fish, and then after like 10 minutes of just battling, he's just like, he gets hung up, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to lose this fish. No way. And I knew it was a big fish just the way he was running, because normally when you hook a fish and he run, and I've had fish to like 30, 32 pounds at the time. So I knew it was a bigger fish than that. So he runs down. I get him out of the snag. He runs parallel to the team that's next to us, gets ready to get tangled in all their lines. And my buddy's like, Tommy, you better pull this fish out of there, man. You're going to lose him because he's going to tangle up. I'm like, I can't, I'm like, I'm trying. I'm like pulling him in. So no exaggeration, 25, 30 minutes of a series, the best fight I've ever had on a rod and reel compared to like, skate and raise, stuff like that. I've never really caught a lot of big saltwater fish, but in comparison, that's what it was like. Just steady running, steady pulling. And I get this fish, and my buddy's got the net, and he nets this fish, and he looks down at the net, and he looks up at me. He goes, Tommy. So I go down, and he said, I need help pulling this thing up the bank. And I'm like, can't be that big. I'm like, come on. So I go down there, and I lift it, and I'm already exhausted. It's been a long day. We've been catching nice fish all day. And I lift this thing, and I could not believe the size of this fish. I'm like, dwarfs any carp I've ever caught. To this day, I've never caught anything remotely close to this fish. And took it down to the team, because your team next to you had to verify with their scales, weigh the fish so you can mark it. So it's an honor system with scales that are checked prior to the event going on. So pull it up. It says 46 on the button, 46 pounds. And I'm like, state record for Maryland's 47. So I'm like, that is, a fish of a lifetime. Had to go and double check it with another team, which was Dave Moore was fishing, who's like I said, the owner of Big Carp Tackle. 2 pegs down, took it down for him to verify, because it was a fish of a lifetime. And ended up, I think on his scale, 45.9. So 46 pounds. So we'll call it 45.5 pounds of just sheer power, man. Just sheer power.
That's a great story. And it's funny that you brought that up, because I'm a saltwater fisherman, and the whole time before you said skate or raid, that's what I'm thinking. I'm like, this sounds exactly like that. My question is like, so it once you got it free and it was cutting, parallel to the shoreline, how many fishermen's lines did you snag?
I luckily it avoided them, because I was holding my rod down, which is a big no-no when you're holding, trying to fight a fish. But with rod up, my line's going to go over top of their lines, and the fish is going to come up and go down. So I wanted that fish to stay deep, stay low, while their rods were, if they're fishing at a distance, it's, their lines are out. So that line looked like it looked like a bird's nest by the time it was all said and done. It was all frayed, just destroyed. It was like 14-pound mono. I was like, there's no way I should have landed that fish. So
but who cares?
yeah, sheer
Twice a day.
luck, man. And
Yeah.
everybody like, this guy's just new on the scene. He comes here and catches a fish like that. I've been fishing like that my whole life, and nobody caught anything like that. So but
Yeah,
I'm lucky.
that is a good story. You said something that gave me a question. Uh, you mentioned several times like the lengths of your carp fishing rods, and I think a lot of the guys that are I know a lot of the guys in the chat, they're fishing either largemouth bass, striped bass, or snakehead, and that rod is pretty similar for all three of those species of fish, and that's probably a 7-foot rod at the max, and you're talking about 9
Yeah,
plus, right?
yeah. Most of them are 12 foot, or the standard carp rod's about a 12 footer is basically 12. I even have a couple rods that are 13 foot. But 12 foot is ideal. I mean, if you're fishing for carp, they have a really soft, rubbery mouth. Even though it looks kind of like it's chunky and beefy. It's not like a crappie's mouth. Don't get me wrong. The hook's not just gonna rip out, but it's kind of soft. So if you got a really stiff, short rod, it doesn't have that really whippy tip. One of the rods I can compare it with is like a salmon rod. If you know about those rods where they're like 9 foot, they're used up there, in Pulaski. Those guys go up there and fish for like the migratory salmon up there. But those are really, really whippy. This one has a lot more backbone at the end. So when you do have fish like that, you can, bring them in. But when it's very forgiving at the tip when you get them close to shore, and you need that because they go ballistic even all the way up until you get them on the bank, and they're flipping out. So
Where do you get a rod like that?
I'm sorry.
Where do you get a rod like that?
You can get them off the internet. Like I said, Big Carp Tackle sells a lot of this stuff. I'm not sponsored by Dave. I just know he's a long good friend of mine, and he carries everything that you possibly could need for the European stuff of carp fishing. And it doesn't have to be that way, guys. You don't necessarily have to use. You can use your 7-foot bass rods, but you can also catch a fish by using a 12-foot, your grandfather's old rusty scupper. But it's definitely a lot more fun where driving that nitro. You know what I mean? So it's all apples to oranges. So you can have the bells and whistles, or you can just have a stick, a branch with some line on it. But chances are, if you're really going to get serious about it, the European method is a lot of fun, especially when you have things like this bite alarm that goes on. You can put this on a bank stick that goes in the ground, and your rods sit on there. And when you get a bite, let me see if I can. Here you go. See if I can turn it on. Oh. So, if I recommend getting bait runner reels like Shimano bait runner reels with the free spool drag, so you don't lose rods. You put that bait runner switch, set it out there, and put it on your rod pod, which is a stand with these on it, or just a simple bank stick that goes in the ground and it screws in. Dave will set you up. He's got all the stuff on his site, including, baits like, the Boilies, like I was telling you about. These are, just a jar of pop-ups. And they come in big bags of like 10 pounds. You could buy them and use for, baiting up if you want to get on that baiting campaign, like I mentioned earlier.
Got a comment and a question. Matt Palm says, wrong one.
Yeah, he is the wrong one. Skip that guy.
Yeah, Matt Palm says, tell the crowd about the variances at the meets. What does that mean?
The variances at the meets. Well, I guess he means how diverse the carp crowd is. When we have these meetings, social events that we set up, and we're trying to set one up for mid-May this year for our first. Basically, we're going to call it a carpathon, and it's basically 3 days of carping and camping and hanging out, and just for those who've never experienced it, like Matt, I took him 3 years ago to a carp event, and he loved it. It's basically just guys hanging out. We went to Haynes Point down in Alexander, or right by DC, right outside of DC, and there's room for 1,000 people there. You throw your rods out, have a little barbecue, and just chill, man. It's social fishing at its finest. You can't really get that unless you're out like on your boat. You got 3 guys or 4 guys. Whatever you can hold on your boat. This, you can throw your rods out. You got your little alarms, and believe it or not, these things even come with remotes, so you don't even have to be near your rod to hear this thing. You can have a remote on you and be down 60 yards from your rods or 100 yards from your rods, and have that 100-yard dash, which is always fun.
Yeah, I mean, when you first showed me that little gadget, what do you call it? Like a rod alarm?
Bite alarm. Yep, it's a bite alarm. It just basically tells you where to bite.
What my brain did when I saw that was think Miller Lite.
Miller Lite, yeah, absolutely.
I was like, I could drink a cold one. Like most of the fishing I do, I'm working too much to really be able to have a beer in my hand. But
well, believe me, I went fishing after work today. I'm in that CCA tournament, with a couple other guys that have been on your show, like Eric, and my hands were like bloodshot red, stinging. I just went for an hour after work. I wasn't prepared for it. No thermals. I got on this is what I was wearing, just a hoodie and jeans, and casting. I caught a pickerel right off the pier, community pier, off of Bustin', and my hands were freezing cold. So carp fishing. Look, I would have hand warmers in my pockets and be chilling. You know what I mean? So I wouldn't have had to worry about that if I was carp fishing today. But yeah, it was definitely it's definitely different when you're out there casting and jigging and working. Yeah, that's work. This stuff is just kind of like play.
Question from our man Cambo Trout. He said, "What?" And I have to, guys, come on. I have to grammar check all your questions.
Please.
What's your favorite type of carp?
Favorite type? I love mirror carp. A mirror carp is basically a common carp with a different genetic strain where their scale patterns are different. Some could be missing, some could be just irregular, and they're super rare here in America, but they're more popular than common carp over in England. So those are just cool. They just because of the rarity, and they look awesome.
Does one kind of carp fight harder than another? Have you noticed?
No, honestly, I think grass carp, again, they're not even really a carp, but they really don't fight hard at all from what I've seen, and I've witnessed other people catch them, like down in Virginia, a couple lakes down there. They fight harder when they're on the bank. They try to beat the crap out of you, in the net, and just go ape shit. But for pound, I don't think there's too many fish in freshwater that fight as hard as carp. Smallmouth bass, obviously, to me, is probably the hardest fighting fish, pound for pound, and then one of my favorites, bluegills. You caught a 40-pound bluegill. If I caught a 46-pound bluegill,
you'd be in the water with it.
I'd be in shock trauma for sure.
Oh yeah, no, a 46-pound bluegill would would spool you, first of all, right?
Oh, you would have no shot at that.
No chance.
You need a harpoon and one of those big rigs, man. There's no way you're getting that in. But basically common carp and mirror carp, they fight the same. Definitely for the looks and the shock value of it, I would say mirror carp are definitely, they get everyone excited when all the carp guys are out there and you catch one that you never caught one in this river or water before, and you're like, holy crap, it's a mirror, and it's this big. Yeah. Nobody really cares. It's cool.
Yeah. When you were talking about the fight, I mean, in the story, I got kind of excited. I hope the people watching tonight got kind of excited. But if you had to compare the way that a carp fights to another kind of fish common to the region, what's the closest comparison? In terms of like head shakes, or is it more like a steady pull?
Oh, it's definitely steady runs. I don't think there's too many fish like them, to be honest with you. Because like, no offense to you rockfish guys, I'm offered to go out rock fishing all the time, and it's just not my thing. Light tackle and calm water, I'm there. I'll do it with you. But trolling and all that stuff with the big heavy rods, you catch a 40-inch rockfish. It's like, to me, it's almost like catching a 12-pound carp. I'm not exaggerating when I say that. I just don't think the fight is anywhere comparison. Now, snakehead, it's hit or miss. You could catch a 6-pounder and he acts like he's 25-pounder. Now I've never caught a giant snakehead. I've gotten them up to like 10 pounds, but I've never caught
Pretty big
I've
one,
never
bro.
caught a fish. What's
Yeah.
that?
A 10-pound snakehead. That's pretty good size
That's
one.
a big fish. Don't get me wrong. I've caught quite a few in that range, but and they fight, but the fight is over in a minute. I normally land my fish without editing any of it. If I fought carp and had to film it on YouTube, you'd fall asleep watching me. It's like, they fight crazy. You get it close to the net, it goes back out. Like
Yeah.
they're just that's why I like fishing for. That's why I love carp fishing. You can pretty much go anywhere, like you said, where you're at. It's the water, the salinity is really high. Even though they don't prefer that water, they will go further back up in the creeks and stuff. But you can pretty much catch them everywhere in this country. I mean, everywhere. So.
Yeah. Yeah, in terms of the snakehead, I've actually had a similar experience. Now, granted, I haven't caught one much bigger than 10 pounds, but yeah, the blow ups for me have always been insane. I never get the little pops, and then the initial 5 seconds is like chaos, and then they roll over. They roll over for me. I don't know what it is, but
I say the same thing. I yet to experience really long run or anything like that. And I have had them pull drag a little, but nothing like a carp.
Question from Patrick Hanna. He asked, a little birdie told me that there are quite a bit of carp in the tidal basin in DC. Will they be in there or in the Potomac River year round, or will they head out in the winter?
They are there year round. It's one of my favorite places to fish for carp. In fact, up until recently, the United States record carp was 57 pounds caught from the tidal basin back in the 80s. And that is a giant fish. And it was a common carp. And it was, I believe, a dewball guy or something. He called it, fishing for carp, I believe. But anyway, they are there. They do migrate. They do migrate to warmer water. They're a warm water fish, just like snakehead, like we were talking about. Not quite as extreme, but they like it where it's warm. So say like White Plains, if you went there right now, any of the power plants, they are absolutely stacked to the gills with carp right now because they go to that where that warm water is. So any little sewer pipe drain that comes in, which, believe it or not, there's a bunch of those around down DC that feed some of those creeks, and that's where the carp will be.
That's just brought another question to mind. Are they a nocturnal fish?
No, absolutely. You can catch them. I mean, I should say absolutely. You can catch them day and night. You can catch them throughout winter, summer, fall, nighttime. It doesn't really matter. It's just when they come up and they're hungry and they feed on the bait, that's when they're going to eat it.
Got it. Another question from Matt Palm. And Matt, I hope I'm saying your name right. He asked, what's your favorite bait combo for your method mix?
My favorite bait combo. It depends on the season. He knows that. He's just playing like he wants to try to win his prize back because he likes.
I know.
I like these custom
everyone's
lures, by the way. He's painting lures for himself and selling them. It's called Efficient Lures. He's selling them at Fishbones, a couple other places, but Matt knows what the deal is. He knows how to fish for carp. He's been around. He's just trying to win some prizes or something.
Got a question from Tommy. Tommy asked, if you fish a new location, what type of area do you look for to set up your rods? That's a pretty good question. Yeah,
that's a really good question. I like that one. I'm going to put that one in consideration for this pack, by the way. So, again, it depending on the time of year. If it's a new location, you want to use this. You want to scout, before you even grab your gear out of the truck, just take a walk down to the river's edge and scout around and see if you see fish surfacing, jumping, whatever it may be. There are areas and ponds and stuff like that they will congregate to and hold to. There's feeding areas. There's traveling areas where, like, through canals and stuff like that, where the water gets skinny. You don't want to fish in water that's real narrow because they're going to be just cruising through there to get through to safer grounds. They love mud flats and gravel that's near mud flats. So any area, we call it plumbing, but just take a fishing rod if you're fishing from shore. just take a fishing rod with a little 1/2 ounce sinker and just plumb around and feel the bottom, feel if it's muddy, feel if it's hard. Hard bottom is definitely better 100% than any silt or mud. So if you could find where there's both, there's like, grass, and they like to sunbathe. So they like to be in areas where the water's going to get warmed up and to be able to get the deeper water if they if they are scared off. So that's kind of what you want to look for, is transition areas with little flats. So that's what I would look for. Good question.
Yeah, well, I mean, the carp questions keep coming in, which is exciting. We put in some snakehead talk at the end of the show, just in case the interest for carp wasn't there, but we haven't had to get into the snakehead stuff a whole lot. Nicholas asked, what depth of water do you typically set your baits?
Depending on the season. Most of the time, I'm fishing water that is not very deep to begin with. Most of the water in Maryland, unless you're fishing like the reservoirs or some of the really deeper waters, you're fishing anywhere from like 4 to 10 feet, 12 feet. So anywhere in that range, 4 to 12 feet, with I'd say 7 to 8 feet is kind of ideal for around here.
I ask this question to everybody that comes on the show, and it doesn't have to necessarily be like your best fish or your biggest fish, but the question is, what's the just flat out craziest thing that's ever happened to you while on the water?
Oh, I'd say it wasn't a fish per se, but last year I got a brand new kayak. I got my first sit on top kayak, which I've always had this little sit inside piece of junk that I would be able to throw in the back of a minivan and fish within 5 minutes while everybody else is putting their batteries and their depth finders and all that. And I'm like, I'm gone, But I got this new kayak, and I took it out, and I think it was like the 3rd or 4th time I went. And I was by myself, and it was in Blackwater area, but not Blackwater, but I was in some very heavy current area of Blackwater. So it's not the rivers that you would think, and I'm not going to name that river because I'm trying to keep it on the down low. But for the most part, it's not sacred by any means. But people that know this, where I'm talking about, the current, you can't hold bottom with like 9 ounces of lead, and I'm not exaggerating. It's that strong. It's like fishing, class 2 rapids at certain spots. So I got pushed up against this bridge that was low, and I'm a little guy, but my sit on top kayak with my seat up elevated, I couldn't turn around. I didn't have a motor on my kayak at that point. I do now, but I couldn't turn around. I couldn't paddle fast enough. I got snagged on the bridge casting for some schoolie rockfish that were in there. They were feeding, and fish were going everywhere. And me not paying attention to my surroundings, I'm paying attention to the fish. I get hung up, and I'm trying to break the line, and I'm getting closer to this bridge. And next thing you know, I cut my finger with the braid because I couldn't break it, and I'm up against the bridge like this. And next thing you know, over, gone. All my fishing stuff, all the rods I had, all my tackle, my cell phone, you name it, all in the drink. So that happened last year. No PFD, like a dumbass. I will never do that again. Never. Because I'm not a great swimmer to begin with. So, and I was by myself in treacherous conditions, which could have ended a lot worse than what it did. So that was my craziest moment ever fishing.
That's scary. I had a similar story, also near Blackwater, also near a bridge with current. And but it's and I'm not going to get into specific spots either. Most people probably know what I'm talking about. But the boat launch is right by it, right? So I actually had my solo skiff with me at the time. Trailered the solo skiff all the way down the water, put the solo skiff in the water, pulled it up on the boat ramp a little bit so it would stay, and went to park the car. Got back, solo skiff is gone.
Oh no!
And I looked way up the river and way, gone. And I started running up to see if I could get ready to swim, and I was like, hang on just a second. I looked underneath the bridge, and one fishing rod is holding the skiff right there. And I just walked under the bridge, grabbed it, and I went fishing. But
that could have been more expensive than my trip, I could tell you.
Yeah, it was. I was panicked there for a few minutes there. I had a question, I think. Oh yeah, Mud Carp ask, what is your largest fully scaled common in Maryland?
No idea. I don't believe it's 30 pounds, but probably high 20s.
And just to give people that don't know carp really well, how long of a fish is that?
Probably 38 inches, maybe 36 inches. I'm not too sure, but roughly around that. It's weird because what our catch and release guys mostly are about inches. You know, when you're doing bass and snakehead, you got your rollers. For carp, I don't know what it is, but it's always been about pounds. You've always been weighing them. And a lot of the times since I've been, you know, fortunate to catch a lot of bigger fish because I've been doing it for so long, not because I'm good, just because I, you know, put the time out there and I catch a few, but I rarely, you know, weigh fish anymore. So unless it's really, really big, like I think it's over 30 pounds, I'll weigh it. But anything other than that, no, I'm normally just letting it go. Unless we're having a little competition.
Yeah, I grew up fishing largemouth down in Georgia, and you know, didn't really put it together. Noticed always down there when you catch a largemouth, you weigh it, and then when I started fishing salt in this region, I noticed everything was length. And from what I understand, and somebody that's watching correct me, is length is a saltwater thing, weight is a freshwater thing, and I don't really know why.
I think it's kind of both, really. I think it's more on the angler and the species, you know.
I've heard girth is more important. I've heard girth is more important than length.
I'm true either way.
We've got time for just a couple of more questions. Cambo asked, what is your biggest bluegill, Tommy?
Biggest bluegill, I think it's 11.5 inches. I'm not 100% sure. My biggest sunfish is over 13 and over almost 2.5 pounds.
So, we used to call those paper plates because you know those little paper.
Exactly what these fish look like. Yeah.
And if you take a bluegill, and once they get that big, they really cover the whole paper plate. I mean,
amazing. They're in a whole different league when they're that big. It's just like, again, like fish of a lifetime. When you start catching bluegills, to me, anything over 9-10 inch bluegills are really big bluegills. And there's some old Jim Gronall, man. That dude is a bluegill slayer. And I was fortunate enough to go fish with him a couple years back, and he's a heck of a guy, man. And he really, really is passionate about bluegill fishing. So I can't wait to fish with him again.
Well, I'm gonna ask you one because I do want to do a little bit of snakehead fishing, snakehead talk, because I was one of those guys. It took me, I think, a full year, at least 4 or 5 outings to catch a snakehead, and I really think, you know, I was actually watching Kaz Blackwater's Edge, his last episode, and he was talking about this too, where it's almost like a hump, right? Like you fish, and then, I mean, for some guys they catch it on the first trip, and you know, F those guys, right? But like it's almost like a hump, and once you figure it out, you know, the floodgates open. But if you're one of those guys that still hasn't caught a snakehead yet, what are you telling them? What is your basic advice to try to get them over that slump?
Well, again, I think you have to fish, and you're better off going fishing with someone that's been doing it and has caught them to show you how to catch them. I remember my first time I caught one, I went several times without catching them, and this is prior to Blackwater. This is the Potomac days and in the tidal basin. I went with a good friend of mine a couple of times, and you know, skunked. And I'm fishing like I would for bass. You know, pause, you know, stop and go retrieves, and fishing with, you know, Senkos and, you know, stuff like that. And I was like, I'm not really figuring out why I'm not catching these. And he went down in the corner one day, caught himself a little bluegill about this big, popped him on a float and dropped him down. And next thing you know, I see water splashing down there, and he's like, I'm like, screw you, man. You know, it's like I'm over here trying, and you're making it look too easy using live bait. So that's, I think, hands down, if you're going to really try to catch one, that's the best way to do it. Just get yourself some big bull minnows from those guys. the bait boys, and or they're selling them at all these local bait stores like Fishbones around the corner here and Anglers. Get yourself some live bait and or catch a little white perch, a little bluegill, and
Yeah.
pop them on the hook and throw them out there. To me, I think you can't beat live bait most of the time. So
Yeah, and any of those bridges over in Blackwater, if you throw a cast net off of them, you're going to pull in little fish that you can use for
yeah,
snakehead bait.
absolutely. Yep. Here's a
Um,
tip. Here's a trip for you. A tip for all you guys that want to go catch bait. Go to Y Mills below the dam. That place is infested with bluegills. Please take some of them out of there. They're all like this big. There's so many of them. Perfect catfish bait. Perfect bluegill. Perfect snakehead bait.
That's gold right there. I'll put that in the comments because that's really good advice. We do have a couple of more minutes, and then I want to give you a chance to talk about what you guys got going on at Amped Up Outdoors. But Dominic asked, do carp make beds for breeding and protect them, or just move on?
Now they're nothing like snakehead when it comes to that. In fact, or bass where they protect their fry for a little while there. They don't make beds. They kind of use the shoreline, the overhanging bushes, grass, rocks, and they just find a pair and you'll have one female and you'll have 4 or 5 males on her, and they'll just cruise the shoreline, dropping eggs. They fertilize and they're on their way. They do drop. A big female will drop like 1 million eggs. It's incredible.
Wow.
How many? There's so many carp, but they do get eaten a lot by other fish when they're small.
I think this is a good question as well, so I'm gonna allow it. The question gatekeeper allows it. Nicholas asked, I'd love to ask your opinion / experience whether you can catch snakehead while there are carp around. Seems like they will feed in the same area at different times.
To my experience, normally I can Blackwater area, for instance, when the carp are up there in thick numbers and spawning, I can tell you the snakehead bite is normally off. Normally, I don't know if it spooks them just like carp get spooked. I think they kind of get spooked and not on a feeding frenzy like they would be if it was quiet. They kind of have their whole domain to themselves. But I think that if you see a lot of carp, it's probably best that you probably find some quieter waters.
Great. I've had the exact same experience, and I couldn't put it together with enough experience, right? But I'd always kind of noticed when I saw those carp gulping for air that I wasn't catching any snakehead.
Right.
So, Amped Up Outdoors, tell us a little bit about what you guys got going on over there.
Well, it kind of started off with just me doing a YouTube page. I discovered one rod, one reel, like a lot of people have, and I met the kid in Columbia one day, and he was hosting the tournament the following week. He said, "You should come down." So I checked it out, and I was blown away by seeing all these kids from all over, like New Jersey and Virginia, and they're all up here. It's like 50 kids signing up to fit. I'm like, dude, you're like a celebrity. This is so cool. I don't think it went to his head then of what was going on. I mean, at the time he was, he probably had a few thousand subscribers. He was nowhere near what he is now, like 1.5 million or something.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable. And he just said, you like to fish, man. Why don't you just get yourself a camera and film it? I'm like, I'll try it. I did it for my own purpose. And long and behold, my friend's daughter, who's now my friend, Matt Palm, came over and said, hey, I want to catch a snakehead. Can you take me? Because I seen your daughter said you catch snakehead. I want to catch one. So I took him down Blackwater, filmed it, and he tried to help me learning the editing part. Told me to stop using the heavy metal music over top, which was, to me, now I don't want to do that. But I got hit with copyright, and they were blocking my videos and all that stuff. So I'm like, this sucks, So long and short, we started this Amped Up Fishing. We just came up with a name for the equalizers. It's Amped Up, blah, blah, blah. I came up with that and started doing this Jivecast thing where it was like a live podcast. It was crappy material. It was just he and I just hanging down here in the basement, just shooting shit and talking about fishing or whatever and goofing off, having a beer. And I didn't even know about a podcast. I didn't even know that existed, to be honest with you. And then, it just grew from there. We got, more friends. I think I got we got 12 people in the group now. We put up videos from everything from fishing to hunting, because I'm not a hunter, never been a hunter in my life, never been hunting, but some of the guys that we've made friends with, such as John Bell and Jake and a couple other guys, Mike, they all hunt. So we're like, well, why don't we just incorporate all this into one and call it Amped Up Outdoors? So, my Mike, like I mentioned, is into hiking a lot. He goes to Utah and, way out west and way up in the mountains and loves hunting, loves hiking. Says, man, it's perfect, get a wider audience. Our page is really slowly taking off, or it's not taking off, but maybe being live here tonight will give us a little bit more exposure. And I really, really appreciate you bringing me on for that. And, that's kind of what we are. We're all about family, friends, friendly competition, having tournaments where we don't make a dime on it. It all goes back to people that can, that fish in the event. We do charity events. We raise money for charity for some of our fishing tournaments, and so far, knock on wood, man, it's been really successful. So, we're just trying to get through this COVID thing to try to grow it a little bit more. Like I said, we got two snakehead tournaments set for the spring and the fall, and hopefully some other stuff in between now that restrictions are kind of going away, especially that big carp event that we're looking forward to in May.
Perfect. Let's give away a prize, man. Do you remember the best question of the night and the name of the guy who asked it?
I remember the guy's name because it was really easy to remember. His name was Tommy. I think it was yeah, there you go.
The question was, if you fish a new location, what type of area do you look for to set up your rods?
Yeah, I thought that was a really good question.
Pull up that picture again to show you the prize pack that you won. Tommy, you and I are Facebook friends, so just shoot me your address on Facebook Messenger. But great question. Tommy, thanks so much for joining me, man. It was a pleasure. I'm really excited that we really didn't even get into the snakehead part of the show. We touched on that for maybe 2 or 3 minutes. We really got to talk about carp the whole time.
That was good, man. It was great to be here. I'm like an hour and 5 minutes past my bedtime. My buddies are going to bust my balls when I hang up here. And my wife's probably going to say, I thought you weren't drinking during the week, but, I had to have a beer on the show,
It had to have a beer. Well, brother, thanks so much for coming by and giving us all that info. There was a lot of really great stuff. Guys, next week, Alan Batista is going to be joining us, and we're going to be talking about striped bass. So thanks so much for watching, and we will see you next week.